I thought I'd arrive early at the lawyer's office, but when my lawyer and I got there, Caleb and his lawyer were already in the conference room. Seeing him with an attractive woman triggered my usual jealous reaction, making me feel somewhat inferior to him. Deep down, at 48, he looked even more appealing than he did at 20. Tall, well-built, the owner of a thriving company, and head of the local chamber of commerce. I shuddered at the thought that if today didn't go well, I might never feel his comforting arms again. Caleb barely acknowledged me as I walked in with my attorney. My face lost color when the red-haired lawyer gently reached toward him, an act I interpreted as more than professional concern. To me, it meant she was eager to wrap up this meeting and chase him afterward. I knew from experience she'd enjoy the chase. My husband had charm, and he knew how to use it. Caleb offered her a faint smile, but when he turned to me, his face was neutral. His refusal to address me directly stirred my frustration. Left with no choice, I took my seat, while our lawyers made small talk. Calmly, Caleb pulled a folder out of my oversized handbag. How he got it, I didn't even want to ask. Flipped through the pages and laid out a concise 2-page script. When he gave a small smirk, I knew he recognized how meticulously I had prepared. He set up a laptop, connected speakers, and placed a single piece of paper beside it. Then, he rested both hands on the table and looked at me with a mannered but emotionally detached stare. No anger, no sadness, no affection. I had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment, memorizing every line I would say. I drew upon my deep understanding of Caleb Morgan to craft a speech that might stir emotion. We had gathered to discuss Mrs. Juliana Morgan's willingness to sign the divorce petition, on the condition that Caleb listened to her for 1 uninterrupted hour. If everyone is ready, I suggest the hour begins now, I announced, twisting the dial on the timer. The loud ticking filled the otherwise silent room. It annoyed me that Caleb insisted on legal supervision instead of a private conversation. My intention was to speak from the heart for 45 minutes before pressing him to admit something that would justify my mistakes. It was uncomfortable enough with just the two of us, now even more degrading with strangers watching. But I had no option left. Glancing at my mostly unnecessary notes, I crossed my fingers and remembered the advice my friend Monica had given me. Cleared my throat. I thanked Caleb for agreeing to meet with me today. I admitted my wrongdoing, clarifying that it stemmed not from any failure on his part, but rather from my own selfishness. I had spent long days reflecting, hoping Caleb might value my honesty. I truly believed he wanted to forgive me, and my words were meant to offer him the rationale he needed to do so. I even considered bringing up the children, imagining a scenario where I pleaded, "Caleb, you can't destroy our family," thinking such a move would tip the scales. Watching his reaction closely, I tried to read his face, only to be caught off guard by what I saw. Caleb remained unmoved. His gaze didn't even flicker toward me. Without emotion, he picked up a pen and marked a check beside the first sentence on a sheet of notes. His reaction rattled me. I had just said exactly what he had expected. And suddenly, I realized something. In all my arrogance, I'd forgotten that while I spent 30 years learning him, he spent those same 30 years observing me in return. I'm not ashamed to admit, I was stunned. I returned to my speech and reinforced the fact that my actions had stemmed from foolishness and self-absorption. I spoke of feeling empty in a home without children, aging, invisible and undesirable. Then I brought up Jeremy, how I had met him while working on a church committee. I painted him as refined, calculated, and dangerously good at seduction. He began by acting like a good listener, hearing out my troubles after church functions, especially last year when Caleb was away so often. One day, after another routine meeting, Jeremy invited me for coffee, and regrettably I said yes. It all seemed harmless, and he came off as a trustworthy friend. I didn't see it then, but he was adept at breaking through a woman's defense as well. From coffee shops, we progressed to restaurants, where he would vent about his wife. I know it's a cliché, but by then, I trusted him. The restaurants became fancier, and the gifts he gave me were increasingly enjoyable. Oh, Caleb, you can't imagine how thrilling it feels when a man 15 years your junior tries to win you over. But you'd be proud, 4 months ago he asked me to sleep with him and I said no. I should have cut all ties then, once his real intentions became clear. But by that point, I had started depending on how his compliments inflated my confidence and ego. I paused and sniffled, wiping one eye with a finger that had earlier brushed an onion slice I'd kept in my pocket. It stung enough that I didn't dare touch the other eye. One teary I should have been enough for sympathy. I stopped, started again, fumbled, hesitated. Oh honey, I'm so ashamed I didn't end things with him then. He invited me to a restaurant and ordered a $1,300 bottle of Grange, even though he didn't drink wine. I didn't want to waste it, so I drank almost all of it. I'm sure that was exactly what he intended. I was too nervous, too unsettled, to push him away. When we left the restaurant, he offered to take me home, and foolishly, I accepted. Once we reached the driveway, he leaned over and kissed me. I was too intoxicated to resist. You know how I get after a few glasses of wine. Then he started groping me. My logic had already broken down. The only thing I managed to think about was moving out of the driveway, so the neighbors wouldn't see us. That's why I opened the garage and motioned for him to park inside. I cheated a bit when I admitted that, yes, even in the car I knew Jason might stay a while. And no, I didn't want the neighbors seeing a strange vehicle parked outside the next morning. But it was all calculated. I knew enough about men to understand how deeply betrayal could injure their pride, and I wanted Caleb to make sure no one else would ever find out. Well, except for 2 lawyers. As the garage door closed, Jason stepped out and kissed me again. As I said, I had consumed most of that Grange bottle. I was ripe for the taking. He grabbed my house key and I let him inside. We ended up in the spare bedroom. And this is something I'll regret for the rest of my life. I let him do whatever he wanted to me. I'm so sorry, Caleb. My only saving grace is that I still had enough awareness to get him to wear protection. Afterward, Jason and I both passed out, me from the wine and him likely from the satisfaction of chasing me for 5 months and finally getting what he wanted. I know for certain. If I hadn't been drunk, if I hadn't been miserable, it wouldn't have happened. If I had woken up first, I would have kicked him out immediately. Instead, you walked in and flicked on the light. I have never been so ashamed in my life. The look of agony on your face. It shattered me. I realized, in that instant, how deeply I had damaged not just you, but us with one reckless mistake. With tears still falling from one eye, I turned toward my husband, silently begging him for understanding. After a lifetime together, I thought I'd still be able to read his face like a book, judge how this was going. But no, that wasn't true. His face remained blank. He didn't even glance at me. It was strange. He was fiddling with the laptop in front of him. I assumed he was taking notes, until he suddenly clicked on a link. And then a voice filled the room. My voice. Jich. Don't kiss me, you reek of beer. What about you? Rotten grape breath. What? I had one lousy glass of white. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. I think that's how it was. The roaring sound in my head drowned out everything else. Yes, I felt embarrassed and humiliated when Caleb walked in on me that night with Jason, before grabbing him by the hair and beating him half to death. But that was nothing compared to the fact that I had just been caught in a massive lie. This completely threw me off track. I was so confident that my script would work. My eyes darted around the room. Caleb's lawyer smiled slightly. Mine looked slightly embarrassed. Caleb just looked at me expectantly with that damn blank expression. Later, I will never understand why I didn't immediately realize what it all meant. What the heck? Caleb had an audio recording of my encounter with Jeremy that night, already queued up. It didn't even occur to me to question the logic. Why would he have a recorder ready unless he knew something would be worth recording? What else did we say? The silence dragged out uncomfortably long. I stared down at the mess of shorthand in my notes and, like an idiot, dove straight back into the speech I'd written. I clung to it like a drowning woman to floating debris. It was only once. It won't happen again. Nothing like that. Please believe me. I just wasn't strong enough to resist him. But I wasn't so out of control that I didn't make him use protection. Or let him touch me in our bed. He wanted to, but I would never let that happen. Not even drunk. We were in Maya's old room, right? Caleb just looked at me with a sadness that pierced deeper than any anger. and I truly didn't know which was worse. His sorrowful look, or the cold, blank one from before. He shook his head slowly and turned back to the laptop. I felt more than heard the double click. Then, my voice played from the speakers. I just like to watch how you lie in front of me, full of desire. It is very hot. Another click. Jeremy's voice. When can we have time in bed again? In your clueless husband's bed? That was so cool. Click. Silence. Caleb's eyes stayed on me. Quiet, accusatory, and unflinching. What could I say? Everything I had just claimed fell apart. Not because of Caleb's investigation, but because of my own voice. Used protection? Like, one-time mistake? Like, not in our bed? Like, all of it shattered within 30 words. Stand. Stand. I was stunned into silence. I glanced up at Caleb again, hoping for some kind of reaction or shift. Nothing. Even my lawyer looked uncomfortable, checking her watch. And then I noticed it, the steady ticking of the timer. Time was running out. I was wasting the 60 minutes I had begged him for. And I was failing miserably. I pushed the panic down and forced myself to speak. I'm sorry for lying about it being the first time, Caleb. I didn't want to hurt you any more than I already had. I thought that if I convinced you it was just once, and gave a reason you could accept, maybe you wouldn't hate me as much. I fell back into silence again. Should I now admit I had been seeing Jeremy several times a week for over 6 months? The worst part, I didn't even know what Caleb already knew. He had audio proving the night he caught us wasn't the first time. But how far did his knowledge go? The fact that he hid a recorder in the same place I used when sneaking around with Jeremy meant he had suspected at least one other meeting. But maybe more. If I was caught in just one more lie, everything would be gone. Okay, Juliana, I thought. No details. Just truth. Be vague. But don't lie. So I admitted, Jeremy did seduce me, and it took some time. He's into older women. I won't deny that the attention from someone nearly my son's age made me feel desirable again. I was weak. That's the truth. I even considered saying we used the master bedroom only once, the first time just to soften the blow. But I didn't know how much Caleb knew, so I kept that part to myself. Still, I couldn't stay silent about everything. Not anymore. I was running out of time to fix this, or at least try. I turned back to my notes, crossed out the opening lines that had already been exposed as lies, and zeroed in on the phrases I had highlighted in bold capital letters. I told him that I never stopped loving him, that I never stopped respecting him, that my love for Caleb hadn't diminished, that Jeremy was an addition, not a replacement, that what I had with Caleb was never lessened, just that something else extra got tangled up inside me. It didn't take from him. If anything, it overflowed. When I paused, Caleb looked back at his laptop. His eyebrows creased for a moment, as if unsure of something, then his face relaxed again. He clicked to play another clip. It was a continuation of the earlier recording. I understood that Caleb's frown indicated he was searching for an icon on the screen before realizing it was one of the open files. It would be better if he didn't grasp it, and he evidently started over, returning to the beginning of the video. I heard Jeremy's voice again, his question about being intimate in our marital bed. Like the first time. I winced, knowing full well that my own words were about to betray me again. I already told you never again. Not after last time. That night, Caleb had stepped out of the shower and accidentally stepped into a large drop of white liquid, something I had nervously dismissed as a sneeze. Thankfully, he accepted my explanation and assumed it was snot. Sinking lower in my seat, I braced myself for what came next. I remembered feeling smug when I first said it, but now, that feeling vanished. I had distracted Caleb by offering to clean his leg, doing it sweetly to draw his attention away. You have to admit, doll, Jeremy had said in a laughing tone. Your husband acts like a clueless idiot sometimes. We went on, smugly recounting how we had gotten away with it. Like when Jeremy had to hide in the closet after Caleb unexpectedly came home early. Insulting, huh? Yeah. Caleb is completely blind, I had joked. I used to find it sweet how much he trusted me. Now I just think he's a naive fool. Then I heard myself say something that made my stomach turn. Sometimes I wonder if we could go at it in bed right here while he's in the room. The mocking tone, the cruelty. I heard it clearly now. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just betraying Caleb physically. I had already betrayed every trace of love and respect I ever claimed to hold for him. I had convinced myself before this meeting that I still loved and respected Caleb. But after what I did, and what I said, how could that be true? As the silence hung thick in the air, Caleb turned his eyes toward me. I couldn't meet his gaze. I looked toward his lawyer instead. The look of open disgust on her face made me recoil. Any doubt I had that Caleb was just another case to her disappeared instantly. This was personal. I turned to my own lawyer. Even she couldn't hide her contempt quickly enough. Here I was, desperately trying to salvage my future, while everyone in the room looked at me like I was something they'd stepped in at the dog park. And one of them was supposed to be on my side. My confidence dissolved like morning dew under scorching sun. My dignity followed shortly after. Maybe that's why I turned back to my notes, grasping at any thread of control. I went on the offensive. I told Caleb that over the past 6 months, he'd been more absent, emotionally and physically. That he was always working, traveling more, gradually pulling away just as the kids left home. And that I felt abandoned and invisible. I told him he hadn't been there when I needed him, to reassure me as I aged, to comfort me when I doubted myself, to show up when I felt lost. But as I spoke, I noticed his eyes go back to the screen, and I cringed again as his fingers clicked open another file. This time it was Jeremy's voice again, and from the context it was clearly recorded after our second time together. He was venting about how little time we'd spent in bed recently. He complained about a trip that had to be canceled. He mentioned how I had asked him to tweak Caleb's diet. He said the only reason he had the chance that night was because of a work emergency Caleb had to attend. Then came the kicker. I just wish he'd go out of town more often. I want more, Jeremy had snapped. And with that, Caleb stopped the recording. I dropped my gaze to the table, burning with shame, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Not his, not either lawyer's. I thought back to what had gone through my head during that conversation. The truth? The excitement of having a younger lover, energetic, bold, had already begun to fade for Jeremy. And for me, the guilt had started to surface. My betrayal of Caleb had slowly eroded my respect for him. And maybe that was the most painful part. I had started distancing myself from him emotionally, not just physically. Even as I prepared for this meeting, I had planned to pin it all on Caleb. Say he was the one who pulled away first. That he neglected me. But that was a lie. It wasn't neglect. It was me refusing to stop what I was doing. I emotionally divorced Caleb. Cutting him off in bed was an easy decision simply because Caleb's lovemaking was so different from Jeremy's impatience that it was impossible to confuse the two. This contrast drove home just how incredibly wrong what I was doing truly was. I began to reject my husband's advances. He persisted for a while, and then he just stopped. Looking back, that shift should have screamed for my attention. Around the same time Caleb suddenly gave up on our bed life, he also started working longer hours and spending more time out of town. At the time, I convinced myself that he was pulling away from me emotionally. Now, sitting there, I closed my eyes and realized I had it all backwards. Who was distancing from whom? And then something clicked. Caleb must have known. For a long time, that's why he hid the recorder in Maya's room. God. My whole plan going into this meeting had been to minimize my wrongdoing, soothe his pride, offer remorse, and earn back the life I so badly wanted. I thought I was calming a freshly wounded bull. But if I was right, if Caleb had known for at least 2 weeks before confronting me, then he wasn't just hurt. He was calculating. And I was wasting time trying to appeal to his emotions. Stand. I had no idea what to do. I'm so much better when I can plan ahead, not when I have to react on the spot. Hence the 2 full pages of notes. But I couldn't stall much longer. That clock was ticking, and my chance was slipping. In desperation, I scanned my notes again, hoping to find a lifeline. The pounding in my head made it hard to process any of the words. Nothing jumped out. Then, it hit me. The recordings were a diversion. A distraction. The rules had changed. The Caleb knew I had planned to leave. What state of mind was he really in? He was, of course, angry about the betrayal. But he must have been equally haunted by questions about my motives. Was he enough for me physically? Did I find him dull and crave something wild? Did I actually love Jeremy? Was I seriously thinking about running off with him? These were doubts I could address. And maybe I could fix this if I tackled those fears honestly. I looked into Caleb's unreadable face, wondering if it was worth the risk to lie again. If only I could remember everything Jeremy and I had talked about that night. If only I could be certain that this was the only night Caleb had recorded. But no, he had to have suspected earlier. Set things up. Hid devices. Waited. He wasn't a great actor, he couldn't keep up a bluff forever. I needed him to believe me. To believe that despite everything, I still loved and respected him. This wasn't just about clinging to a lifestyle. I didn't want to lose him. But how do you convince a man you respect him after he's heard you mock and belittle him? How do you undo the damage of calling him goofy in front of your lover? Trying to justify it, like I was just venting to feel less guilty or build a fake bond with Jeremy, was useless. The damage was done. And the same went for love. If I had caught Caleb cheating and heard him say those things about me, no power on earth could convince me he still loved me. So earning back his belief in my love and respect, that would take time. And the only thing I could do right now was buy that time. I had to convince him not to force me into signing the divorce papers today. But how much longer would that awful timer keep ticking? I knew one thing, what I said next had to count. Digging deep, I lifted my eyes and looked straight at Caleb. No more glancing away. No more shame. I told him that I understood what he was feeling, that it seemed like he had lost my love and respect. But I reassured him that it wasn't true. I still loved him. I still valued our life. I still wanted a future with him, only him. I acknowledged how serious my actions were. I admitted that Jeremy had been a distraction, not someone I loved. I made it clear that I never planned to run away with Jeremy. Not once. I confessed how wrong I'd been, especially in agreeing to distance myself from Caleb at Jeremy's suggestion. And, reflecting on everything, I said, I didn't even understand why I went along with it, especially after convincing myself that I was merely providing Jeremy with an excess that Caleb couldn't handle. I emphasized that Jeremy lacked the stamina and experience Caleb had always possessed. My actions, I admitted, were driven purely by lust and selfishness. The physical part may have provided short bursts of pleasure, but it was hollow, emotionless, and meaningless. I clarified that I had never engaged in the same intimate acts with Jeremy that I had long refused Caleb. Time began to distort in my mind, as if it were mimicking the slowed pace of someone on the brink of death. I watched the collapse of my marriage unfold in a kind of dreamlike slow motion, while the rest of the room moved at normal speed. To my left, my lawyer threw down her pen in visible frustration and turned toward me with a glare. In that moment, I realized I couldn't even pay someone to be on my side. Caleb's attorney leaned slightly, angling for a better view of the laptop. That's when I realized the truth. He hadn't been playing just audio. These were videos. The weight of that discovery crushed whatever hope I had left. Across from me, the woman now holding Caleb's hand in quiet support gripped it tighter. He didn't look at me, but I saw his reaction nonetheless. The pain in his posture, the betrayal carved into his silence. A flash of devastation flickered across his face. From the corner of his eye, the one closest to me, a single tear slipped down. Was it real grief, or had he simply hardened, focusing on the screen to numb himself? My brain, grasping at anything to avoid the emotional storm, registered a useless fact. The recording had been made at least 3 weeks prior to the confrontation. That meant Caleb had been watching this unfold for some time, enough to see a pattern. And still, he waited. The silence thickened as the speakers filled the air with fragments of what used to be passion, now drenched in something grimy, cheap and tasteless. I stared at the table in front of me as my lawyer slid the divorce documents across the polished wood. There was nothing left I could do. I had no way to justify the filth Caleb had just presented with surgical precision. He dismantled every excuse, every watered-down explanation, every feeble olive branch I tried to extend. It was over. Caleb didn't need to speak. Like a conductor in a grand orchestra, he simply pointed, chose what to reveal, and then let it play. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scream. He simply executed a silent symphony of separation. No, it wasn't Caleb who destroyed me. I walked up the scaffold willingly, blindfolded and holding the rope. He merely built it and walked away after pulling the final lever. Once the last clip ended, he no longer needed to hear what I had to say. He already knew. He knew what I would try to claim. And in building my entire strategy based on my intimate understanding of Caleb Hamilton, formed through 30 years of marriage, I had somehow forgotten the most obvious truth. He had spent those same 30 years studying me. And now, his intelligent, knowing eyes pierced through every false note I had played. The humiliation was too much. And so I ran. I fled from that room. I fled to the only place that still resembled safety, the house I technically still lived in until Caleb filed the eviction notice per the agreement. I ran toward the children. I prayed they would never find out. I begged the universe that they would still love me without knowing the truth. My only redemption, if there was any, would have to come through accepting loss. Through signing away everything. I picked up the pen. I signed both agreements. And I flung the pen aside in one defiant, desperate motion. I was stunned that Caleb's business wasn't valued higher, but, according to my lawyer's analysis, it wasn't worth more. Then again, Caleb had weeks, maybe months, to hide his assets. The final recording had ended by then. The ticking silence returned like a metronome of finality. My lawyer collected the signed documents, handed me my copy, and placed the rest into her briefcase. She left. No goodbye, no support, just gone. I sat there, frozen, torn between wanting to disappear forever and craving the smallest spark of hope. Just something, anything that might suggest this wasn't truly the end. That perhaps, someday, I could show Caleb I still cared about his well-being. The sharp sound of an alarm clock disrupted my thoughts, prompting me to stand up and deliver my positive phrase. The jackal, holding Caleb's hand with both hands, urged him not to seek revenge on Jeremy, expressing her fear of never forgiving herself if he ended up in prison. Caleb's response was another damning video, thankfully not featuring my voice, but that of another woman speaking in an almost shrill tone. She warned of the consequences Jeremy would face if her brothers got to him first, bluntly identifying herself as Mrs. Jeremy. I had assumed Jeremy's silence after Caleb's beating came from fear, but now, maybe the real punishment would be being divorced and broke. Stripped of everything, just like me. The weight on my conscience grew unbearable. What if he died because of his connection to me? I had ruined so many lives. As I stood up, gathering my things to leave, I couldn't bring myself to look Caleb in the eye. It didn't matter if his face was blank, contorted in pain, or even smiling. All of it hurt the same. Every flicker of expression was a mirror of what I'd done to him. A decent man, crushed under the weight of betrayal. He had lost everything, except for my house and a fraction of the money. And he had suffered an emotional collapse so severe, I doubted I'd ever forgive myself. And he owed all that devastation to me. I deserved every ounce of his fury. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered the weakest goodbye, dear imaginable, and slowly shuffled toward the exit. My pitiful attempt to reclaim my former life had been rejected, tossed aside like some filthy insect. Maybe my daughter, Maya, would come visit me when I sank into oblivion. Or if not her, maybe my son, Evan. Just as my hand pressed against the doorframe, a sound stopped me cold. Another recording. Again. A cheerful young man's voice filled the room. Cheater. Then came another voice, a painfully familiar one. A young woman, almost pleading. Are you sure, Dad? And then, I think I'll drink alone today. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. See you in the next one.